Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Impact Investing webinar series episode featuring Martin Muoto from award-winning SoLa Impact. We're going to be discussing opportunity zones and how they can be used to address racial inequity. I'm Jimmy Atkinson, founder of Opportunity DB, co-founder of OZ Pros, and host of the Opportunity Zones podcast. Also joining me today is Will Walker from CrowdCreate. Will, why don't you say hello, introduce yourself briefly, and tell us a little bit about CrowdCreate.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, this has been a great series. So I encourage everybody not to take advantage of Martin today, but also our past recordings too. But basically, my name's Will Walker. I'm a 24-year private equity veteran, certainly. And CrowdCreate is a 7-year-old strategic digital marketing company agency. And we've had a lot of success. We've raised over $200 million here. In the last number of years. We have over 15,000 family offices in our database with over 45,000 accredited investors. So we're known for our strategic content, our strategic and targeted video content, videos, that type of thing, but we can almost address any capital raise or growth strategy that a company or a project would need. And we're really excited about joining forces with OZ Pros and quality funds like Martin is going to tell us about today with his SoLa fund. So hopefully that makes sense. I look forward to having a discovery call with our audience and their projects and their investment needs at another date.
Perfect. Thank you, Will. I'm going to turn it over to our featured speaker today, Martin Muoto, in just a second. But first, a couple of logistical things for anyone who's about to ask me. One, yes, this webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered, whether you're here or not, if you registered for the webinar, you will be receiving access to the recording. We'll send that out to you tomorrow afternoon or late tomorrow morning. And then two, we are going to have time for Q&A at the end of our session today. So if you do have any questions for Will or our featured speaker, Martin Muoto, or myself, please use the Q&A tool in your Zoom toolbar. It should be at the bottom of your screen there on most platforms, and hit Q&A, and please do submit as many questions as you can. Oftentimes we don't get to answer all of the questions that are posed to us. We end up running out of time. So the sooner you can get your question in, the more likely it will be that we're able to answer it. So please do use that tool if you have any questions for us. I'd like to now turn it over to Martin Muoto. And he is the CEO and founder of SoLa Impact, which earlier this year was awarded the grand prize from Forbes and the Sorensen Impact Foundation as the Forbes OZ20 Top Opportunity Zone Fund, Top Urban Opportunity Zone Fund. Is that right, Martin? Maybe you can go into that a little bit when you tell us about yourself.
Perfect. Well, Jimmy, thanks for having me, and thank you for the kind words. Really admire what you've been doing in terms of providing a forum and thought leadership in the opportunity zone space. So really pleased to be here. Hope everybody had a fantastic Labor Day weekend. As I was thinking about and preparing for this presentation, I thought to myself, I've really done it now. I really put my foot in it in taking on and trying to address what is undeniably a very weighty and important topic, but it really is something that the timing and I think the opportunity zone legislation calls for it to be looked at in the light of how it can be used to either accelerate and encourage racial equity or prevent that. And so I want to start by making a whole number of disclaimers. The first is that we are not thought leaders. I consider myself a pragmatist, not an ideologue, and we'll leave thought leadership up to groups like the Opportunity DB and Opportunity Pros. But we are in the field, and we have a lot of boots in the ground, and so we're very close to some of the key issues that are playing out in the socioeconomic landscape of the country. I think that the subject of using opportunity zones and opportunity zones in general to create racial equity or as a tool for racial equity is something that can become very polarizing and can become very political. And that really is not our intention. Our intention is to really look at it more from the lens of how it can be an enabler of solutions. And so we won't spend as much time on what led to the problems, but it's also important to acknowledge and admit that the country as a whole has been imbued with structural inequity around race and around access to opportunity. And land use is perhaps one of the most stark areas. If you look at the history of the country, the history of land use, and I'll point you to the book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, which really talks to how some of the underpinning of racial inequity was created by various land use strategies and edicts in the past. So clearly it's important to start by just acknowledging that we are dealing with some of the consequences of 400 years of inequality. And the opportunity zone legislation is certainly not a panacea. It's certainly a tool that we believe in that can create opportunity. I think that we will speak shortly here to our own experiences in SoLa Impact, but we don't want to be put on a pedestal by any means. There are other OZ funds that are doing incredible work, both in urban areas and in rural areas. And I often point to our co-winners of the Opportunity Zone Award in Opportunity, Alabama and Erie, Pennsylvania, as folks that are equally committed to really driving social impact. With those disclaimers, I will start by giving a little bit of my background and then talking about what we are doing, what we've achieved at SoLa Impact. And really the idea here is we always look for other funds, other participants in the Opportunity Zone ecosystem to beg, borrow, and steal our ideas. We encourage and we hope that others make even better ideas and give us feedback on that. And we look for other participants to drive this. As Jimmy pointed out, we were selected as the leading urban OZ fund by the Sorensen Impact Center and by Forbes magazine. Recently, Inc. 500 came out with its list of fastest growing private companies. We were the 7th fastest growing minority-led business in the country. I feel like that's a very specific niche and carve out, but we'll take it. And we have raised over 200 million now to invest primarily in Los Angeles's Black and Brown communities, the broad area of South LA, including Watts, South Central, Compton. And our goal is to primarily through housing, but also through economic development, access to education, to really drive social change in those areas. And so that's a little bit more about my background. I think I'll also mention, and it's been in other articles and podcasts, I grew up in northern Nigeria. I came to the States when I was 18. I was fortunate enough to have a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania in the Wharton School. I came to the US with $440 in my pocket. And so I really experienced my form of struggle along the way. That being said, I had the benefit of having loving parents that really were committed to enabling me to have the best education possible, and certainly saw that opportunity played out. The reason I start by sharing that is that where I grew up in northern Nigeria has really become ground zero for Boko Haram and the Boko Haram movement. And what I saw firsthand growing up was what the consequences of lack of opportunity, lack of access to education, and in that respect, a fatalistic mindset led to. And the combination of those forces really led to very bad outcomes, right? And so that imbued on me the desire to ensure that in my career, I would try to do whatever was possible to ensure that communities that I was in really didn't see those outcomes and really created opportunity, economic development, and jobs so that there wouldn't be that desperation. So that's one of the underlying operating principles that we have at SoLa Impact. On this page, I'll point to some of our extension of that operating principle, which is that when we invest, we remain. We are long-term holders. We have been before the opportunity zone came around. We don't believe in handouts. We believe in hand-ups. And so a lot of what we hope to enable and drive is the opportunity for folks to really rise beyond their circumstances. And particularly because the topic of gentrification also is something that is very sensitive and real, we look at ways to uplift the community and not uproot. I share as our definition of success a greeting that is common in all throughout West Africa. And that greeting goes something like this. Folks ask, well, how are you doing? And the response is, well, I'm doing well if you're doing well. It's said with an accent. They go, I am doing well if you are doing well. But it is really our fundamental definition of success, which is that we do well if our community does well. We do well when our tenants prosper. We do well when jobs and prosperity is created around us. And it always surprises me to some degree when people talk about social impact investing and they ask about returns. And there's an expectation that you have to have concessionary returns and lower returns in order to do true social work and true social change. And our view is that, quite frankly, it's possibly the opposite, which is when you see that the community and the folks in the community benefit from the investments, the economic opportunities created, they then are much more able to pay rent. They're much more able to increase values and access jobs that they weren't previously able to. And so we'll talk about how we have attempted to ensure that shared prosperity in what we are doing. Because this is about racial inequity, I think that it would be imprudent not to address some of the racial strife and some of the protests that are going on. And as I prepared for this presentation, I got a question from a friend who's actually from Australia, and he asked about the history of Labor Day. And I found that I really wasn't quite as familiar with the history of Labor Day. And so just did a little bit of research. And really back in the late 1800s, there was an environment of labor strife. And this was throughout the US, but it was really catalyzed in Chicago in 1886. And what started out as a peaceful protest and a peaceful march ended up becoming an iconic pivot point for the labor movement, which was the Haymarket Riot, which happened in Chicago. And I thought I would share just one quote from that, which is on the screen. And August Spies was a labor activist, and during his speech at the Haymarket March, he said these words: "There seems to prevail the opinion in some quarters that this meeting has been called for the purpose of inaugurating a riot, hence the warlike preparations on the part of the so-called law and order. However, let me tell you that at the beginning of this meeting, this has not been called for any such purpose. The object of this meeting is to explain the general situation of the 8-hour movement and to throw light upon various incidents in connection with it." And I share that only because we are, as a country, dealing with the consequences of the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and dozens of other Black and brown individuals, and we are experiencing real strife. And I think that it's often very depressing to see what is going on across those situations. But when you look at it in context of something like the labor movement, you realize that all progress requires a struggle. And we are in that struggle. And I think that there's the possibility of really making progress through that. I want to separate and differentiate the protests, peaceful protests that are happening in the country from rioting and looting, and there's in no uncertain terms, do not condone the violent acts that are happening as part of the protest movement. But I do think that it's just important to acknowledge the folks that are trying to deal with addressing and putting a spotlight on the racial inequality that has existed for some time in the country. Again, I think that what was also jarring when I looked at the labor movement and the somewhat similarities to what is happening today, the central issue of the labor movement was quite simple. They wanted 8-hour work days and 5 days a week. What we think is so standard and commonplace today, 8-hour work days, 5 days a week. And that was in an environment where folks were being typically required to work 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And a lot of children as young as 6, 7, and 8 were part of that labor movement. So I share that not to be an expert on history, but to share that every period of progress does often require struggle, and it is certain that our country is struggling with it, and we want to really acknowledge that situation and really support the outcomes, which is the quest to create a more equal society, to create more equal access for Black and Brown communities to capital, to jobs, and to opportunity.
That's great. That's great perspective there, Martin. I wanted to interrupt you there for a minute. I wanted to engage our attendees here, and then I'll let you get back into your presentation. But I wanted to launch our first poll question here. I've asked this at a few other of our webinar episodes in the past, but just curious, what is your experience level with impact investing? What we're going to be speaking about here throughout the course of the presentation today. And Martin, I'm not even sure if you would identify your Opportunity Zone Fund necessarily as an impact investment first and foremost or not. Maybe you can answer that question for me when we get back here. But I'll just give everybody a few more seconds to vote on this now. It's really easy. Just go ahead and pick one and hit submit. And it's fully anonymous, by the way, too. So feel free to answer truthfully. And I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. Still got a few more votes coming in here. And we'll end the poll and share the results. And it looks like the vast majority of the people on the call today are either not experienced or only have some experience. Only a handful of people in the room today are very experienced. So that's great. I think that, in some ways, the Opportunity Zone program or interest in Opportunity Zones is kind of bringing about a new class of investors into the impact investing arena. So Martin, what do you think of those results, first of all? And then second of all, I'll ask you that question. Do you consider SoLa Impact to be, or the Opportunity Zone Fund specifically, do you consider it to be first and foremost an impact investment?
That's a great question. And the poll results are really indicative on a couple of fronts. Number one, yes, we do consider SoLa Impact a social impact platform and fund. We've always explicitly had that as part of our double bottom line strategy and have explained that to investors and to our various constituents. On the other hand, our hope is that over time, social impact investing is not a niche in and of itself. It simply becomes investing, right? And so it over time, we believe that all investments through many sectors should be looked at from the lens of how do they create shared prosperity and joint outcomes in the communities that they affect. And so we, as this slide points out, organize our activities around 4 pillars. And those pillars are around really affordable housing, of which in LA, a very important component is homeless prevention. We're facing a crisis of affordable housing, and that is resulting in about 60,000 people a night living in the streets, and that has only been exacerbated with COVID-19. And so we've, for the last several years, but more particularly in the Opportunity Zone Fund, about 80% of our projects are affordable, covenanted affordable housing throughout Los Angeles, meaning that they are set aside significant portions of the buildings for low-income, moderate-income folks. We also partner with nonprofits, about 40 nonprofits that really go beyond our property management services to really address and cater to the needs of that vulnerable population. So that's really been something from the outset of our first fund that we have targeted. In our first two funds, much of our activity was really around renovation and rehabilitation of affordable housing and preserving affordable housing. In our Opportunity Zone Fund, and this is something unique in the OZ Fund, and perhaps enabled by some of the legislative changes that have happened in LA over the last several years, we really are building a lot more. So it was gratifying to preserve the affordable housing, but in our OZ Fund, we now are going to be building around 1,500 affordable housing units throughout Los Angeles, and that's incredibly exciting.
Yeah. Hey, Martin, real quick, I just want to interject something that you touched on briefly, because, you know, when people from the investment world, especially since we have some novice to OZ funds or in OZ investing in the audience here today, you know, diversity is something that I always preach in my, 20 plus years of advising portfolios and certain things. But your main thought is do well by doing good. So whether you're dealing with the opportunity, with the nonprofits, which sometimes gives investors and certain affordable housing, I guess, homeless prevention, all of your topics here, I want to just kind of lead into, continuing to bring up that your profitability, your do well by doing good theme has always been a constant. And I love your background, of course, in private equity and understanding that everything has to sustain itself in the process too, for both investors as well as your project. So just want to kind of throw that in there and, make sure that our audience is really understanding that diversity can come hand in hand with profitability on all of your initiatives here.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that. I'll jump forward in a second here, where when we first started investing in South Central Los Angeles, I mean, I had made investments personally in Venice. I had made investments in Echo Park, and as I looked at the various communities and really felt a strong affinity to South LA, I also saw the absolute opportunity, and unfortunately, most investors ignored and in many respects wanted to avoid South LA. And I had dozens of brokers tell me, listen, you're going to have high eviction rates, you're going to have high delinquencies, folks will trash your buildings. And our view was quite the opposite, which was the vast majority of folks in low-income areas like South LA are good, hardworking people that want a safe place for their kids. And if you could give them a really good product, which was a completely rehabbed apartment, we were using stainless steel appliances, we were using tile backsplashes, we were using hardwood floors, things that they would be proud of, and they would be considered that their home. In return, they would treat it as a prized possession and would really reward that with paying rent on time and really treating it as their home. And we've seen that in spades. We use the example at times where it's like the teacher that is told, and this has been sort of chronicled in various studies, that here's a group of students, they're not that good, they're not that capable. Just give them the whatever you can, and let's see what the results are. And that a same randomized group of students, and the teachers are told these are outstanding students, high potential, really drive them forward. And the outcomes from the same set of randomized students, when the expectations are drastically different, lead to very different outcomes. And so that's been something that has been poured into investors. And unfortunately, we saw a lot of that in the South LA community. And we are trying to change that, which is to really look at it as a community of incredible diversity. 95% of our tenants are African American and Hispanic. 2/3 of our tenants are low income, and 1 in 2 of the tenants who were placed into our rehab buildings have experienced homelessness at some point in their life. So that comes with its own set of challenges, but we feel that we've found ways to really ensure that those tenants stay housed. After a year, about 92-93% of our tenants are still successfully housed despite having a history of homelessness. And so those all come with hard work and real focus. Again, I'll touch on this slide quickly and then migrate to some of what we are dealing with in COVID, and broadly how the opportunity zone legislation itself can be a tool in other communities for racial equity. One of the pillars, in addition to community engagement and community development, is access to education. This is something that, again, based on my own personal experience, has always been very close to our heart. I use the example, 2 years ago, we gave away $10,000 to 5 students that were in the community, outstanding young people, and that was all funded by our operating company. Last year, we gave away $100,000 to 27 kids, and the stories were remarkable, and the schools that they were going to were really impressive, and we've continued to mentor that group. This year, we gave away 26 scholarships to the community, and so again, that's simply we did that because we believe that creating and encouraging the community to pursue higher education was important. What we found is, inevitably, after we awarded the scholarships, in the past we would have a gala where we would celebrate the students. This year we did it virtually and online, but we would get tenants that had a higher FICO score, more money in the banks, slightly longer tenure. And I asked one of the applicants, how did you find out about SoLa, and what made you apply to our building? And she said, well, I heard that if I live in your building, my kid can go to college. I was like, whoa, not quite true. I think our marketing got ahead of ourselves, but it demonstrated that they felt that there was a landlord that wanted their kids to go to college and was committed to that. And we have now expanded that program greatly, and we'll talk about that. But to us, we share that because we want other OZ funds, other non-OZ funds, to find ways to really invest in that, and fortunately, we're able to raise the $100,000 from our investors, who all have, are better off than we are, but it really demonstrated their commitment to our mission, and it was really gratifying to see. A final thing I'll touch on, and there's a slide in the presentation later on, is equally important. We believe that all of the affordable housing that we can build is great, but not enough, right? We can continue to work on affordable housing, but it's really on only one side of the balance sheet. And what we felt is that we have to really create economic development and stimulate jobs. And so last year we bought what we called the Beehive, which was the first Opportunity Zone business campus. We had the privilege of having the Ben Carson and Scott Turner and a few of the members of the OZ team come out and visit with us and the community as a whole to talk about what this could mean. And we're about 2/3 of the way through rehabbing that campus and bringing it back to life. Our goal there is to have minority and women-owned businesses to occupy that space, social enterprises to occupy that space, and we are about almost 50% leased on the campus despite OZ, as well as high growth companies that may not be from the community. What we're asking them to do is to pledge to create opportunities in the community, meaning mentorship opportunities, job training opportunities, to hire from the community, and to spend money for contractors and vendors in the community. And we track that to enable that. So again, those are some specific initiatives that we have underway. And it demonstrates, again, various methodologies that investors, developers, incubators can take to ensuring that opportunity zones become a tool to create racial equality and access to opportunity.
That's great, Martin. Hey, Martin, sorry, I want to interrupt you there for a minute. This is one of the things I like the most about your particular Opportunity Zone Fund is it's not just real estate. It's not just affordable housing, but the fact that you have an accelerator built in on your platform as well, I think is really powerful, because I believe that could be possibly the greatest impact of the Opportunity Zones initiative is spurring business creation, spurring job creation. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about the Beehive a little bit later. Before you continue with your presentation and talk about your COVID-19 response that you've made to your residents, I want to ask you, how did you first identify South Central LA as a place where you wanted to invest, as a place where you wanted to buy up and rehabilitate real estate? And did some people, it sounded like some people thought you were crazy for wanting to do that, but you must have seen something in the numbers. I mean, you were investing in West LA, I believe, a little bit, a more affluent part of town, much more affluent part of town, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Los Angeles. And then you went into probably the lowest income part of Los Angeles. What prompted you to do that? What did you see in the numbers? And I know, please, you are not a charity. You have investors. You're a for-profit enterprise. You're trying to make some money. You're trying to generate a return. So what did you see there?
Sure. I'm not sure if I found South LA or South LA found me. Mm-hmm. One of my general rules of investing is you go to where other people are not going. In the premise that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So perhaps we're the one-eyed man. Areas like, Venice and Echo Park and Lincoln Heights, they were picked over. There were so many investors going there. Everybody felt that those were the places to be. And I felt that, if you really are looking for returns, you have to go into where you can manage risk differently. And so going into the South LA, obviously being a person of color myself, I felt very comfortable being able to navigate block by block, street by street, see where the opportunities were. And there was an incredible amount of opportunity, not only because other investors weren't there, but there was a tremendous amount of older, dilapidated buildings with problematic issues, deferred maintenance. And so you could get them at very good prices and really work with the tenants to turn them around. And so we developed a unique strategy and really engaged the community to ended up buying about 140 different buildings in South LA in Fund 2. We were doing this before the OZ legislation was introduced. The OZ legislation greatly enhanced our capabilities, our fundraising ability, and as well as extended the timeline of investment. And it probably, I'll do a little bit of a sidebar of really addressing explicitly why the OZ legislation potentially has the power that it does. I start by reminding folks that it really was a bipartisan bill. I think that it has become polarized, like many things in politics have been, but this was really something that was started by Cory Booker and Tim Scott, Democrat and a Republican, to address the ability to invest in low-income communities. Secondly, is it required a long-term perspective. The 10-year hold forced investors to really be patient, and that's critical in low-income areas, both on the rural as well as the urban side. Third is that it called for investors to be active investors, meaning that you couldn't invest in a well-run apartment building or a hotel that didn't require any investment. The working capital requirement, the requirement to double your basis, required that you do value-added investing in some respect. And we were doing significant rehabs to the buildings that we bought before the Opportunity Zone legislation came in. And we, as we learned about it, Jeremy Keel was one of the folks that sort of came and met with us and said, listen, you guys are, you should be doing OZ investing. And we said, listen, there's not a lot of government programs that we've found to be beneficial. We're a private investor. We're unapologetically a for-profit company, but we didn't. And then as we looked at it, we realized 2/3 of our buildings were already in opportunity zones, and sorry, half of our buildings were already in opportunity zones, and 2/3 would have qualified for the significant improvement test. And thus we launched sort of the opportunity zone fund that we did. It was initially targeted to be a $100 million fund. We raised about $115 million. And so, but those elements being bipartisan, having a long-term perspective, requiring a value-added approach, really enabled us to get started, and it really aligned with what these communities really require from an investor. I also want to point out that because it wasn't like LIHTC and because it wasn't like new markets tax credits that were fairly bureaucratic and centrally controlled, it allowed for a democracy of investors. Not everything in the OZ legislation is perfect, by no means. There's certainly some gaps and some flaws, and we, allow the thought leaders to point those out. We point them out. We would ultimately love to see even regular ordinary income get some of the benefits. One of the things that I've found in communities like Los Angeles, and particularly in communities of color, where there are folks that do earn a good living, and particularly some of the folks in LA that are in the entertainment, sports, and media business, most of their income is ordinary income, not capital gains. But that being said, again, we're less concerned with the politics of it, but the effect of it. I'll briefly touch on, because I know we're going to start running out of time here, some of the things that we did in response to COVID-19, and I think it again underscores the importance of OZ funds and the OZ community to respond to these times much more intentionally. And it also, in our view, underscores how social impact and how doing well ends up allowing you to, doing good allows you to do well. When COVID-19 first started, at least we started noticing it impacting our community, we immediately realized that it would have a disproportionate impact on the Black and Brown community in two respects. One, from a health perspective, and we've seen contraction rates almost 3 times the non-minority population, and death rates 2 to 3 times the non-minority population because of health indicators and the like, but also economically. And so our social impact team, which is about 8 people strong, became effectively a call center, an encyclopedia of every state, federal, and local resource, financial aid, rent assistance, and we were helping our tenants fill out applications, navigate the system. And many of you, or any of you who have worked in low-income communities, realize that half of the battle is simply knowing where to go and how to navigate the system. So I joke that somewhere in Washington, D.C., there are these incredibly well filled out applications, no mistakes, and those are coming from South LA, from SoLa tenants. And we've directly been able to track that we've helped our tenants get $140,000 plus of rent and financial assistance. We've been doing weekly deliveries of food to our elderly tenants and those that are homebound. This is entirely a volunteer activity. Our staff volunteers, contractors volunteer. We've had architects, we've had investors volunteer. It's just gratifying to participate in this. The food comes from various food banks, but we have been doing this for about 20 weeks. We've been delivering free food, in many cases almost a week's supply of food to our tenants and that are elderly or that are homebound with a health condition. Halfway through, we realized that technology and access to technology was very different. Kids in Santa Monica and Brentwood had resources that our kids did not have. And so we launched a GoFundMe campaign. We were able to raise $40,000 and deliver 150 Chromebooks to our tenants' kids to allow them to keep up with schoolwork and to give them access to technology. We've been able to partner with a number of nonprofits to bring COVID testing to our buildings, to the Beehive, for free. And that has been, as you know, something that's critical in these communities is adequate and responsive testing. The last two things I'll mention is we decided that because of the impact of COVID-19 on particularly frontline workers and entry-level jobs, a lot of our community was being laid off and furloughed. And to take lemonade and make lemons out of, take lemons and make lemonade out of it, we decided to launch this COVID retraining and recovery scholarship fund. And our goal was to raise as much money to allow adults that had been furloughed and laid off to go back to school and get associate degrees, applied vocational degrees, particularly in healthcare and technology, jobs that would be in demand post-COVID. We initially got a grant from the Ashley and Mark Merrill family office. Ashley and Mark have been real supporters before a lot of the unrest and the focus on racial inequality, and have really, and I'll say this is maybe a little bit controversial. We went around to the OZ community, say, look, we're trying to pull this fund off. It doesn't have to be in the SoLa fund. It can be in whatever initiative that you want, but we think that the Opportunity Zone community needs to respond in some concerted way. And I must have spoken to easily half a dozen, maybe a dozen OZ funds, and many of them simply patted me on the head and said, isn't that special? And I call it out because, you know, we feel that we have both an opportunity in the tax benefits of OZ, but also responsibility to really live up to the billing. And so, you know, we had raised about 250,000, and I got slightly discouraged, and I thought, listen, okay, I must not be good at this nonprofit stuff. It felt like as hard raising that money as I had worked to raise $100 million. And then, you know, you get that call of a career where, you know, I got a phone call saying, well, Miss Oprah Winfrey would like to speak to you. And I go, right now? They go, no, not right now. We're going to set up a phone call, and you know, she heard about what the Oprah Winfrey Charitable Foundation's heard about what you're doing and would like to learn more. So we obviously scrambled to, you know, even dust up our presentation, and we had an hour-long conference call with Miss Oprah Winfrey and her team. And at the end of the call, she goes, this is great. I love it. I'm committed through my foundation on one condition, that you do this for some of my friends. And next week we were on the phone with Oprah and Jimmy Iovine, and at the end of the call, he goes, Jimmy and Dr. Dre said, listen, we love what you're doing. We're committed on one condition, that you do this to some of our friends. And we go, look, we will keep doing this until you run out of friends. So we ended up raising over $1 million. Those are going to scholarships for the South LA community. And we are in the early stages of deploying that. I have the email address there where folks can volunteer. We're looking for mentors for these folks. So not only are we awarding scholarships of between $3,000 and $8,000 to all of the recipients that qualify, but we really want to support them with mentorship, with job placement opportunities, and we're really building out a network of real partnership. I also want to give credit to firms like Goldman Sachs, General Atlantic, First Republic Bank. You know, a number of other firms responded. So some of which have opportunity zone funds, some of which don't. But I think that, again, the challenge is for other OZ funds to find their way of impacting their communities and making sure that they adhere to that. Final thing I will say is we just launched last week. It's new. We haven't raised the money for it. Which is an initiative to provide free internet access to 1,000 families in South LA for 1,000 days, which will carry them through the COVID pandemic, we hope. But we continue to see the inequality and the digital divide. And so this is something that's very early. We hope others beg, borrow, and steal this idea and improve on it. But similarly, if there are folks that have great connections to the telecoms, the Verizons, T-Mobiles, Spectrums, and so on, we encourage folks to come alongside of us and join us in this mission. So I realize that we've gone a little bit long, so I'm going to pause there. But I want to underscore that in no means do we want to applaud ourselves for these efforts. We want to share them because we feel that there really this is an incredibly important time to be on the right side of history, to really look at racial inequality in the country that has been systemic and find solutions for those issues. We feel that things like the COVID Retraining and Recovery Fund, what we are doing in the community to provide bridge the digital gap, those are all ideas and examples of solutions, not to dwell on the problems. And we look forward to hearing of other solutions and other ways that other participants in the OZ ecosystem are addressing similar needs in their communities.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Martin. You're doing great work here, obviously, but again, not to pat yourself on the back, but when you get noticed by someone like Oprah and then her friends and then her friends' friends, that's how this thing really scales. I think that's part of your goal here, is to get this to scale through other people picking up on what you're doing and using it as a model. Why don't you move on and tell us a little bit about Beehive for a minute or two, and then we'll turn it over to some questions for the last few minutes.
Great. The Beehive is something that was similarly very exciting for us. It represents around 15% of our fund. Initially, when we went out to buy the campus, which was it's a commercial space, we had investors that said, listen, we understand your track record in residential. You guys have a demonstrable set of experiences and competencies there. I don't know about this commercial space, and we got pushback. And so, as I said, every quantum leap requires a struggle. And so it was really difficult. And I spent countless nights worried about how do we bring this across the finish line and get not only investors, but the community on board. We now have 6 warehouses. These are incredible red brick buildings in the heart of South LA, about 10 minutes from downtown, that is all in the opportunity zone. So businesses that get located there can be designated opportunity zone businesses. And we're trying to build this ecosystem of social enterprises, minority and women-led businesses, and high growth companies that really support and participate in opportunities in the community. So, I was hoping we could show you a video of it. It doesn't come across very well over Zoom, so we won't do that today. But we really, look for others to embrace not only this opportunity, but similar opportunities to ensure that minority, women-led businesses in their community are really, they're enabled to have access to capital that has historically been very difficult for women-led and minority businesses. So again, we have a lot of good partners in that. Novogradac, Square Milner, Alan Matkins have all come alongside of us to provide discounted and pro bono services. We may be calling on CrowdCreate. In fact, I know that you're working with one of our prospective tenants, I won't mention which one, to aid their efforts. So those are all great resources to enable job creation and economic development through the opportunity zone legislation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. We do have a few minutes left for questions here, so I did want to turn it over to some Q&A, but first I want to launch our our poll question here. This will be the last poll question I ask. We want to know, what's your primary interest as an opportunity zone investor? Maybe you are an opportunity zone investor or thinking about becoming one. Are you more interested in doing real estate or operating business, or maybe a mix of the two? And Martin, we've got a bunch of questions here. So, and by the way, if you do have a
Jimmy,
question,
let me jump in with a quick question.
Go ahead, Will.
Myself too. You know, Martin, I'd be really interested. Yeah, it's great, and I applaud you and I applaud Oprah and her friends for coming along in the early days and, you know, continuing to be the initial impact. But how do you approach investors now? And, you know, since we have so many new investors in our audience today, and you're constantly finding and meeting more, how do you approach them? What do you say? Where does the process go, whether it be in a retail side or a fund side? Could you just touch on that a little bit, because you're so experienced in both worlds of investing?
Yeah, I'll mention just two things broadly. First is that we're laser focused right now on deploying the capital that we've raised and demonstrating real results there. And that for anybody who's thinking about Opportunity Zone Fund, it's really, you know, about having a track record and sustaining that. I think that from our standpoint, we're beginning to look at more national opportunities. It's very early stages, but I think several of our investors that are based on the East Coast, they're, you know, outside of LA, love what we have been doing in South LA. And often the one thing I get from investors is, we want you to stay incredibly focused on LA, but come to wherever they are. If they're in Boston, they want us to come to Boston. If they're in Baltimore or DC, they want us to come to Baltimore, DC, and Houston. We think there's an opportunity in major metropolitan areas that have a low-income population that has historically been a minority population, which is unfortunately highly correlated. And so we're beginning to talk to operators on a national platform, about a national platform to extend that. And so I think that there's real opportunities for other funds that are focused in their respective areas. Real estate's a very local, it's a very local initiative, and you really have to know your local market. So we don't have the hubris to believe that we can go into other markets by ourselves. And so we've looked at development and operating partners in those markets, and we're continuing to do so, you know, through the end of the year and well into next year.
Excellent, thank you.
So I did want to end our poll question here and share the results. It looks like the majority of our respondents, about 2/3 of you, say that you're interested in a mix of real estate and business. Very few of you interested in just being in a single asset class. So let's turn it over to the questions. And Martin, you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, is that right?
You know, roughly.
Okay, we'll cut you loose here. We'll be a kind of a brief Q&A today.
Stay as long as you can, Martin, but I know you're busy.
Well, Mark asks, does SoLa only support projects in South LA, or do you have any plans to expand beyond South LA, or are you really focused on South LA at this time?
As I mentioned, our current fund's mandate is broadly Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Our intention is over the next 1 to 2 years to look at potentially partnering with operators and developers in other cities, primarily on the residential side initially, and then looking at beyond that.
Good. Patrick has a couple questions for you. He says he's a bit confused. I think going back a couple slides when you were talking about your COVID response, he asks, is SoLa QOF a for-profit or non-profit fund? If it's for-profit, what are its return expectations for investors?
So two things. We have an affiliated nonprofit called the SoLa Impact Foundation. We set that up several years ago, primarily to allow us to give scholarships to kids in the community, and that's been funded now by investors and partners, as well as the operating company. Our expectations, because we have a somewhat open fund, I can't speak to them publicly, but we expect market returns. We've delivered market returns consistently throughout our life. We believe that we're in the top quartile of returns, but again, it's not a solicitation. We don't, this is not to solicit investors, and we wouldn't do that without a prospectus. And so I just want to put all those disclaimers out there.
Yeah, good. Jason asks, do you have a construction partner?
We do. We have many. We've been doing a lot of that over the years with sort of dedicated, most of them local contractors and subcontractors. But as we scale, we're certainly looking to expand our contractor and development network.
Good. And let's see, Eagles has a question. My pal Eagles, who I've done some of these webinars with in the past, he wants to know, given the various initiatives that you have underway, Martin, which ones appear to be the most replicable and or scalable to other opportunity zones?
You know, I think that I can't answer that in terms of a definitive. I think different communities can inherit and replicate certain models. I think that the overall goal of what I've shared is to really encourage opportunity zone fund operators and folks in the opportunity zone ecosystem to be very intentional about how they're making these investments with the community and ensuring that the community participates and sees the benefit. Whatever happens in the upcoming political, you know, in the political landscape, there's going to be more scrutiny on opportunity zones overall, and therefore we feel that it's very important to get to the front of that and to demonstrate voluntarily how these initiatives are creating social impact. So I think that's probably the broad answer.
All goes with track record, Martin, too, you know, and both on the investor side and also the wind blowing on the political and regulator side. So that's really smart. I think that's a outstanding answer.
So Martin, I know you got to cut loose here in a couple minutes, so we'll just have time for a couple more questions here before I let everybody go. Marcy asks, and I think you hinted at this already, but she asks, what kind of fundraising did SoLA do to support the support of rent assistance, food deliveries, and Chromebook donations? Has the foundation community embraced opportunity zones? I know you mentioned the GoFundMe. Was there any other sources of support there?
As I said, we are not experts in nonprofit fundraising, and I found I was doing a lot of that. I don't get paid to do it. I think the United Way of Los Angeles was one of the nonprofits that came alongside of us. Obviously, the Oprah Winfrey Charitable Foundation is a foundation in its own. And we've just found that we are able to communicate to philanthropists individually much more effectively. So we would love for the Ford Foundations and the Carnegie Foundations, the Kresge Foundations to come alongside. You know, we just don't, we don't have those contacts and haven't reached out in that direction.
And then a question from me, I asked you this on our podcast interview many months ago, Martin, but I just want to kind of reiterate for everybody here. You mentioned that, you know, when you've been doing this type of investing for years, well before opportunity zones came in. When the opportunity zone map was drawn, you realized that a lot of your real estate was already in an opportunity zone. So that could potentially be a criticism of the program, but I'd like you to counter that by saying how much more quickly were you able to raise capital? Were you able to capitalize these projects because of the opportunity zone program versus if it had never come to fruition? What was the difference that made?
You know, our first fund was a $10 million fund. Our second fund was a $55 million fund. Our third fund has been a $115 million fund. And I know the difficulty of trying to convince folks to invest in communities like South LA, and the number of no's that we got in the early days. And so I'm incredibly pleased about the investors that we had in Fund 1 and Fund 2 and them signing up. But it was a dramatically different experience doing it in the Opportunity Zone Fund, the ease of convincing folks. And we didn't have to have the tough discussions about, look, this is a 10-year hold horizon. You're going to need to wait for 10 years to see the total fruition of the gains and so on. So it's made a dramatic difference. I think that we would not be able to do what we're doing, particularly on the ground up development side, without the Opportunity Zone legislation. So we certainly have a dog in the fight, but we have seen firsthand the tremendous benefit that is brought to this. The final point I'll make, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, is that in many of our initial funds, our investors were very socially aligned, meaning they really believed in the mission of what we were doing. In our Opportunity Zone Fund, I say a third of our investors are very socially aligned. A third of them couldn't care less, and some of them don't really aren't that committed to social impact. And then the last third are sort of a mix, and we take all of that capital and we put it to good use. So it's important. We don't judge the intention. I remember growing up, I went to a mission school and I had to go to church 3 times on Sunday. It was Sunday school and main service and evening service. And my mom would go, listen, it doesn't matter your attitude going to church. It matters that you're going to church. And so I don't judge the attitudes or the intentions. What we want to do, what we want to encourage folks to do is really put the capital to work in communities, both in the urban setting and in the rural setting that impact folks that have been most vulnerable. And if anything, COVID-19 has really highlighted how interconnected we are as a community, how this is a global world and we're all interconnected. And the most vulnerable in society are the folks that really need that care and focus. And so we think that that's where opportunity zones can really demonstrate their unique advantage and again point to others that are doing equally good work in other areas, both urban and rural.
Fantastic. Well, Martin, we're a few minutes past the top of the hour, so I don't want to keep you any longer, but thank you very much for your time today. Thank you to everyone who attended. We've got a couple more announcements that we're going to make, but Martin, I know you may have another appointment to get to, so if you have to hop off, that's fine. Before you do go, Martin, can you tell everybody where they can go to learn more about you and SoLa Impact?
Our website, SoLa Impact, I think we finally got our upgrade and then demonstrate.
You did, I noticed that, it looks good.
Various projects and I put up there the volunteer at SoLa Impact, only because we are, continuing to expand that network of folks that are coming alongside and certainly if folks want to be, as I said, our food drives, which are every Thursday morning, we're giving food to the community in a socially distanced, very safe way. I think we have an event this Thursday with South LA Forward, which is our partnership with a couple of other nonprofits that are dealing with food and access to healthcare. So we really invite others to participate in any way they can.
Fantastic. That's solaimpact.com. Okay, well, thank you, Martin. And so if you got to cut
Martin,
out, go ahead.
Before you let him go, Jimmy, Martin, try to include, if you've got any video or any other content on the Beehive. I know we have a lot of investors, experienced and non-experienced with OZ zones and, what these campuses can look like and be. And of course, we've got Craig Bowers, who you alluded to as one of your tenants, who's giving away a lot of Chromebooks soon. And so if you can kind of send that along, we'd love to here at Crowd Create, along with OZ Pros, get that out to as many people that were either on today or couldn't make it today for one reason, to really show them the different accelerator operations, for lack of a better word, that you've got here at the Beehive, and what that can do. So I think that's if you can include that in any way, I'd love to be able to help get that out there.
Yeah, give me that link to that YouTube video on the Beehive, Martin. I'll send it out.
Yeah, I know it.
I'll get you that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but certainly we'll make it available. And again, thank you very much to OZ Pros and Crowd Create for providing a platform to have this discussion. It's such an important discussion, and I think we only touched on a few aspects of it, but I hope others will continue to refine and challenge our ideas, and we're really proud to be part of this community.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. Will, I know you had an announcement that you wanted to invite everybody to an upcoming webinar of ours. Is that right?
Yes. Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, on the 24th of September at noon Pacific, roughly, we're going to have an invitation-only mastermind, Opportunity Zone Mastermind, and we're going to cap it, but at the same time, we'll send out invitations here to leading operators and true capital allocators that are active in different spaces, share ideas, share concepts, certainly help each other along. And so we'll be sending that out, and that'll be on the 24th with a combination OZ Pros and Crowd Create Mastermind. So
thank you. Yeah, we'll be sure to email everybody about that coming up in a few weeks here. Again, thanks everybody for participating. participating today. I'm glad Ashley was able to join the last few minutes here just to get his face on the TV here. And we'll be back soon with another episode, everybody. Thanks again to Martin and everyone for
Thanks,
participating.
Martin.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, everybody.